back to episode number 3. We're finally getting the hang of this now. We are well into it. How are you, Matthew?
I'm good. The first day back at school with kids in today, so a little bit more. I don't know if it's more or less stressful than inset, but it's nice to have kids back in the school. So it's nice to get a little bit back.
You've had quite a bit of training time beforehand as well.
We had a week and a half, but to be honest, like we tried this year to redo our inset. So like we did everything that we had to do in like the first 2 days, and we just tried to give teachers as much time to do planning as possible. So we just like very, very crammed at the beginning. But then like for me, who leads on secondary, everyone's had about 5 days with their teams to get working and planning. So it's been pretty smooth. So I'm hoping we keep this pattern in the next couple of years because it's worked really well this year.
Awesome. That's such a good thing. We have the traditional one TD day on the Monday before you go back. We were actually with the sort of senior leaders working all that out, how that day was going to look. And it's just jam-packed from safeguarding through to the cyber stuff, through to digital updates. So much to kind of cram all in and give some time over as well. So I like that idea of having an extra couple of days for planning.
Well, you've got to give, especially like every school, you have multiple priorities coming in every year. And by the time you've done your safeguarding, all the statutory stuff, that's 1 day gone. And then we've got internationally, you always have quite like a lot of new staff coming in. And if you start telling them lots of things, by the time you get to the 3rd day, they forgot everything that happened on the 1st day. So you've got to, it's easier to pace it out. And we just pushed a lot of that. Lots of things would have been me or other leads on certain things, speaking at them for an hour. We just turned that in. The heads of the department have all been here for 5 years. They all know what they're doing. Here's a list of everything your HOD should do with you. So we just kind of like pushed it out a little bit more this year. And it seems to have been really positively received. So, and yeah, we had the fewest number of questions on the first day of kids in the school today. So that's a good thing.
You can always do it. I think it was I think it's Adam Boxer. He always plays a game of how many times do you have to repeat it, and he would sit there on observations and he would count how many times the teacher had to repeat an instruction. And that was always a good sort of task to see how clear you were giving it and how simple you'd broken it down and so on. And that was a great way to analyse. So actually, it's quite a nice little tip there of
what did we say in our first pod? Well, we were talking about our IT issues that we're having at the school and how I hoped that the fact that teachers would have classrooms would solve that issue. And it did. Like today is the first time I've had 0 IT issues with computers in rooms in the 7 years I've worked at the school. So subject classrooms has been the winner. It's been an excellent addition to the school. It's the first time I've not had to run around and solve IT issues. I think, and actually, no, I had to find one smartboard pen that had gone missing. Other than that, it's like no technical side of stuff has gone wrong.
Oh, well, fingers crossed, and long may that continue, because I've got a weird one this year. I'm actually doing a TD day at another school in the morning. So with Inventor Club, we're leading a morning down at Princemead School. And then I've got to fly back to Swindon and then do training for my school. All in one day. So it's going to be a bit of a mega one for me. So I'm missing a fair little chunk in the morning, doing stuff with the business and then flying back and then doing smartboard training because we've just had them installed over the summer. Nice. Teachers are going to come back and classrooms have completely changed. But then that just brings another element of training to it. So hopefully, fingers crossed, they'll get used to it and they'll be happy and over the moon. But I dare say, like I said, we'll have a few little hiccups in those first couple of days. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm ready and raring, very rested and eager to get going, particularly now that I am a Canvassador as well.
There we go. I'm trying to get on the list. I'm going to keep watching I need to keep watching the list open up for this year. I'm trying to see.
It just snuck in there, thankfully. But I'm over the moon because it's something I've been doing for years. And I'm going to try and do more training sessions about it. I'm not like a social media guru or anything. So I'm really hoping that I'm going to do a couple of posts sort of throughout the year, up my game a little bit there, but actually just start talking about more of the stuff that I do with Canva and share a bit of that, particularly with the Magic Suite stuff and the AI features they've got, which should hopefully grow over this year as well. So yeah, really, really excited about that. So I'm going to try and do more Canva stuff as we go along as well, which would be amazing. But we do have another guest this week, so we're going to stop chatting away because we've got someone else far more interesting than we are. Who have we got this week, Matthew?
We've got Philippa Wraithmell. She's the founder of Edruption, and it's all about building digital ecosystems in schools, but making sure they're actually sustainable and they actually work. So she's worked in the UK, the UAE, and has an amazing book called The Digital Ecosystem. It's a fantastic resource. I use it all the time, and it's all about how to go about building your digital strategies, but also including people like your IT officer, your students, like people that sometimes get left out of these kind of decisions when you pick up a bit of tech and you just want to run with it. So it's all about making sure if you're going to bring tech into a school, you use it well and it just works. So she's just got amazing tips on how to make that happen.
Oh, amazing. Right. So let's bring in Philippa.
Hello, Philippa.
Wasn't shocked still by that.
Here she is. I know. I'm so sorry. That was like a real abrupt boom. Here we are.
Just a drop in.
Oh, how are you?
We are good. Thank you so much for coming on. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Thank you. Really good. Thank you so much for having me. Exciting.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Now, unfortunately, because of the way our thing works and we haven't figured it out, so our last guest, we got it slightly wrong. This is slightly better, but then you missed the beautiful introduction that Matthew gave you, so you'll have to wait till the actual one comes out. But you are CEO, owner, founder of Edruption, and that's what you're sort of up to at the moment, isn't it, I believe?
Yeah, that's right. And it feels really weird to say or hear founder and CEO and things like that. In fact, for the first few weeks, well, probably longer than that, months, I didn't even want to put CEO because it felt really weird. Because, yeah, I don't know, it just didn't seem right. I guess maybe as an educator or I'm not really sure what, but it's been quite strange to think like that. But yes, I have founded Edruption. I actually sneakily about 2 years ago found the domain and have been paying for it for a while. So kind of thought of the name and then just kept it and just thought at some point I'll do that, and then I did. So yes, Edruption is obviously education disruption, but actually now it was chatting to a friend who actually runs UHQ, who said you should have something that's slightly more positive because sometimes the disruptive bit scares people. So the tagline is now empowering change, which is exactly what we do, hopefully.
Yeah, because disruption was used like quite a bit the past 2 years with AI, and everyone was really happy with it. But there is a bit more of a shift now of people, not getting sick, but I think of going, well, yeah, we've been disrupted, but now kind of what's the norm?
Now what?
And that's what I think everyone's looking for now, isn't it? It was particularly in the AI sort of sphere, the tech sphere, Edtech, and so on. Everyone's looking for the what now, what next?
Exactly, definitely. And I think ISC Research do the Edruptors, and that was where it came in terms of initially when I was announced, I think it was 2021 as an Edruptor, and it came out of nowhere. I'd never even heard of ISC Research at the time, and it was kind of from there. But you're right, and exactly that is, and that's what I don't want to kind of be known as, is kind of like this I guess, one off, like, wow, look at this is really magical, everyone loves it, get on board. And then actually, where does that really go? And I think everything that I've always done and things like the book that I wrote were all about the sustainability. How do we ensure that schools know how to take the buzz and actually solidify that and make it something really constructive and really supportive to our ultimate goal, which is student learning and outcomes for those students and for them to enjoy themselves and just have a really great time at school, whilst hopefully also helping teachers like ourselves to do that a little bit easily, a little bit more effectively. And so that's really where the whole empowering change bit came from as well.
That's the key thing, isn't it? Like there's always a bit of hype every time. Even like if Teams update with like a slightly new feature, everyone's like, oh, this new Teams feature. And then it's actually, how do you take that new thing and actually make it something purposeful?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important. Like whenever I go into schools, obviously when you talk to different people, when you talk to leadership, it's a very different conversation to a teacher. But when I talk to a teacher, it's never about technology. And I always start with, I'm not an IT teacher. I'm not anything. I've got a fashion degree. And actually, when you put that into context and you go, it is really scary. And I had to work out why I was using it, and actually then help to kind of pull out, okay, so what do you do, and how might, actually, did you know it could do this, or have you tried this, because I think that could really enhance or really help support that, or whatever it happens to be. And it's about finding the teachers kind of why, because then at least they understand that, then they're going to utilize it more, and they're also just going to see more value in it. And then ultimately, obviously, when they understand their bit, it helps them to then sort of see the bigger picture of, well, that doesn't really work unless we're all in this together, and it doesn't work if we've not got the infrastructure and we're not talking to people about things. So yeah, it's just so important.
So you talk about your background there being in like a fashion degree. That's cool. What inspired you to make that shift to digital strategy or using digital tech in schools?
Well, it was quite a long shift, I guess, in some ways. So I did my fashion marketing degree. I had my eyes set on being like a buyer for some fantastic brand somewhere amazing, probably in America somewhere. And then unfortunately at the time, 2007, 2008 was when there was obviously the recession in the UK, and all of the things that you would have done that were really exciting and fun about being in buying and fashion and things kind of disappeared, really, because people's budgets got cut, and it just didn't quite feel like the thing that you saw on the movies, I guess, is probably the easiest way to say it. And I've always loved kind of the idea of being in teaching. My mum was a teacher, kind of been surrounded, my auntie was a teacher, things like that. And so then it was, okay, or maybe I could do something like that. But actually the tipping point for me was finding out that I could teach fashion at school to students. So I could still kind of do that, and I could do the hands-on thing, and I didn't have to do, because I kind of always had this bit of a thing about, I'm not very academic. So I had to do something really hands-on. So I would do design technology. Ended up doing food and nutrition for many years, and actually not really teaching a lot of fashion at all, but leading departments, and then sort of renovating and supporting multi-academy trusts to grow the departments and revitalize them. And then moved to the Middle East, which was when I inadvertently got into digital strategy, because I got told, could I possibly do the iPads? And it was like, okay, what does that mean? And they were like, oh, like just like everyone has an iPad, and so you'll probably do a bit of training, and then then help the kids, and you might teach a bit of computer science, but only to the little ones. To which I found out it was over 100 members of staff, and at the point when I left, there was nearly 2,000 students, and there was also parents, and they were safeguarding, and there were no policies, and it just became this thing of every kind of day I'd get in, and it'd be like, oh, there's a box of drones, we thought you could use them, and I would just be like, I don't really know why, I don't know how, I don't know what. So it was a massive learning curve, and I just kind of got the impression, I was like sat there thinking, how many me's are sat there in a room somewhere right now going, what am I doing? Oh my goodness, what should I be doing? And so I at the time reached out to kind of the ether of Twitter and just said, help, what should I do? I need some advice. This is where I am. What would people do in this scenario? A little bit. I mean, lots of people do still now. And I think the network of teachers online is so fantastic for the support that we give each other. And that's all sort of how it ended up happening. And then I guess it really grew from there. I guess understanding what it felt like to sit in that room and think, okay, I've got all these iPads in front of me. I don't know what I'm doing. It has to link back to learning. It has to be meaningful. But there's also so much other stuff that needs to happen. I need to help other people do that. And that was sort of where it really grew. So I did an awful lot of work on just supporting people to understand it, but then sharing what I knew, and then trying to help other people and support them in any way that I possibly could. To the point where my husband just got really annoyed with me answering messages on Twitter and on LinkedIn and things like that. And he said, just write it down, like put it in a book. So I did. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got into it. It was very inadvertently. It wasn't kind of like, oh, technology, amazing, let's do that. It just kind of happened, and actually I really enjoyed it. And so I could kind of link it to a lot of things that were really meaningful to me. Like, I'm dyslexic, it really helped that for me. I really understood the why. Like, I started to kind of be able to bring things back to real world. Like, for instance, the drones became search and rescue in remote countries, or they would be dropping supplies off to a disaster zone, or whatever it happened to be. But everything became a link back to why are we using it in the classroom? And it was never like teaching how to fly it. It was teaching why are we flying it? And so it just all linked back to that. And I just got such, I guess, a real bug for it, and just kind of loved it and thought, oh, this is awesome, that everyone should know how cool it is to teach with technology.
It's things like you said about a hype, isn't it? Like, you can go to like an Edtech conference and see these awesome drones, and someone who might go, I'll just buy a box of drones and bring them back to a school. And then it's like, you've just like spent half your school budget on a load of drones. What do you actually do with them?
Exactly. And it's all of the stuff behind that I just don't think is ever really thought through. And still now, like, schools go, oh yeah, we've got loads of devices, they're all coming in September. And I think, well, why have you ordered them for September? They absolutely should have arrived in August, because do you know how much stuff you've got to do to them before you hand them to a child? And it's things like that, it's all well intentioned, but it's only through going through it that you kind of go, that's not possible. Like, okay, let's step back. And I'm very quick to kind of go like, let's do this. And now I maybe it's age, but also maybe it's hindsight and having reflected a lot on what I've done. But I am now kind of going, okay, I even found myself in a meeting earlier today saying to somebody, I know that you want it all to be perfect, and I know you want to do it right now, but it will take time. And I thought, oh, you'd hate someone saying that to you.
I think that will resonate with a lot of people if they kind of, it just falls in their lap a little bit, doesn't it? Whether they're ready for it, whether they went for it or not. And like you said, that really resonates me with do the iPads. That's kind of what people thought. I just went, oh, just go away and do it. And so I was always known as the plugs and battery guy. So if it had plugs or a battery, that was me. It just fell under my strategy at the time. I love using that word. It brings a bit of seriousness to it, and everyone thinks that you're doing stuff. So yeah, it was. I started nicknaming it the plugs and battery strategy. Which, but I mean, even then, it doesn't stop there with what you're doing, because at the moment you're still studying for your master's in neuroscience. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So kind of what, for me, literally once I had this, the biggest thing I want to know is what's your biggest takeaway? So, because I think there's such a huge link with what goes on with hidden curriculum, with the brain development and so on, risk taking for children, and all that stuff. There's so much you could kind of dig into without even touching on the actual way we learn and metacognition and so on. So what would be your sort of biggest takeaway from what you've studied so far? What's the one thing that teachers should really know from neuroscience?
So, God, I get really geeky about it. I absolutely love it. I think it's just phenomenal. Even down to when I had to do the history of it, and I was learning about like rats and mice and zebrafish, which is what they actually do research on to find out about Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, because they have the same structure of the brain cells that we do. I was like, oh, what? Crazy. But like, so it's just amazing to kind of think about especially the teenage brain. So there's a lot of research into the world of like middle schools and how important it is to have that middle school model, because at that time of development, there's so much that changes. And I have a 13-year-old, and for the last 2 years, I've literally just watched him go from a child who can articulate himself beautifully and have such common sense to a child who goes, and you kind of go, okay. And actually it has helped me on so many levels, not just in teaching, but actually as a parent as well, where I kind of go, okay, in a classroom situation, I would have at points in time, especially when I was in the UK teaching in a city and lots of conflict happening, there's a lot like, lack of nurture for them at home, etc. And where you're at school is their like solid point. And you'd come into conflict. And actually now, having done a lot of work into what does that mean for a teenager, it's actually that their brain and their mouth don't react at the same time. So you will ask them a question and they will snap. And if you actually take a step back and be the adult, obviously, which is what we're meant to do, which doesn't always happen, and we can't always, control ourselves sometimes, especially when lots of things are happening, and maybe if a child is constantly doing it. And actually say to them, okay, I realise that you probably didn't mean to speak to me in that manner. However, I want you to just to take a second and reflect and have a think about what I've asked you, and then think about your response again. Because even those little things, because what the brain does is so quickly reacts, but actually the internal teenager is going, I didn't mean that. That's not what I wanted to say. I don't know why I did that. I don't know how that came out before my brain engaged with my actual answer. And then they're on the back foot and they can't answer the question that they want to answer because they've got to save face. So they then have to be this grumpy teenager that's being, aggressive and annoying and, is going to get in trouble and all that, because actually the child inside them is going, well, I've done it now. I'm going to have to see it through. I'm just going to have to, I'm going to have to live with it. And the consequences, and as you were just saying as well about that kind of reactive, there's so many studies. There's a really great book as well, which is really digestible, called The Teenage Brain. And that goes into details as well about how within that period of time between, and it's not necessarily teenagers because it can happen with tweens depending on when they go through puberty, we start to see a decline in the way that the brain functions. And so the brain starts to get rid in its mind of all the things that we don't think are relevant any longer. So a child then starts to fuse in on those things that are really, really important to them, which also, when you think about it, is why do we leave them choosing their options until so late? Because actually, if we let them choose the things that they really love and are really passionate about, we can grow and develop and nurture that, and then bring in some interdisciplinary skills within that to teach them many, many, many different things. But realistically, on their pathway, they think I'm doing the thing I love. And so it's just fascinating. So yeah, and that's where we forget. And so sometimes when we think about, I can't remember what it was like when I was 5, I don't remember what I did when I was 10. It's actually because your brain just forgets them and it puts them to the back of the mind, and it stops them being as relevant because it isn't the key concepts that they actually want to focus in on. And so I've kind of gone off on little tangents there, but there is so much happening in adolescence with the brain. And it's so important. And I remember reading when I was first reading about it, I don't understand why we don't get taught it at university when we're becoming teachers. Because if you're becoming a secondary school teacher, or even a key stage 2, upper key stage 2 teacher, you should know about these things, because having in your toolkit the ability to go, okay, I can see that they're going through some changes there. This is also going to affect them. And then we put that together with potentially also the jigsaw puzzle of what's happening in their home life. You're able to interact with a child in a very different way. And actually what we end up doing at school, because it's so traditional still, is we say, no, you must keep learning these things, even if you don't think that they're relevant. And you're going to sit here and believe that it's relevant for this hour until that bell goes. And actually in their brain, they're going to switch off. They're going to think about different things. They're going to want to do lots of other things to entertain them. And so then when they're free and they're able to kind of have their own thought process and concepts, they do things more erratically, because they then are so, they almost crave the ability to have their freedom. So we're kind of locking them in this little box. They escape out of the room, and then they do things, because their brain also reacts so quickly, even more erratically than they would if they were able to have a bit more freedom of choice. And I think so the middle school model is very, very effective because it helps to nurture through those ages. But in actual fact, also what we should be doing is saying, let's look at what students are really interested in and hone in on that. And, when we opt for things in year 9, actually, let's not make them do a whole year of it. They've made a choice. So let's just start that choice. So there's just so many different things that are happening. And actually, some children or adolescents don't actually have a fully functioning brain that's kind of put itself back together until they're 25. And that, most people have finished a degree. And that's why also quite commonly you get people changing what they want to do, because they didn't really know what they wanted to do. And actually, again, it builds back into, well, actually, if we teach kids skills and we teach them how to communicate and how to support one another and how to be empathetic and have those beautiful human attributes, they can learn to do anything. We just have to, and that's what, for me, what school is all about. And I think the neuroscience thing is incredible on so many different levels. And I'm looking at the moment, this new module that I'm doing is all about mental health, about societal developments and how that's impacted mental health. And I'm also listening to there's the book it's on about screen, Jonathan Holtz, and it's all about I can't remember what it's called. It's gone from my head.
I've just bought it, but I haven't read it yet.
Yeah.
And I can't forget that. I don't remember the name either.
I've been listening to
Let me
it
look
on
my
audio.
phone. I'll see if I can remember it.
I know it's really fascinating, and he talks a lot about the development of the brain and how you have like tweens and you have teenagers, and actually, like, my son went through puberty a lot earlier, so he's 6'2" at 13 and has got quite a deep voice, but his friends are 5'2" and have a squeaky little voice, and and actually their parents will say, oh, he's so lovely, he's so kind, oh I don't want him to become a teenager, and actually it's so interesting to see all those different times, and it happens to children at such different rates, and then we introduce all these societal things which have an impact on their mental health, and we kind of allow them to do all these things that maybe they're not ready for, or maybe aren't nurturing enough to their actual development, and it starts to stunt that as well. And actually sitting in a classroom not feeling like you have purpose stunts a student's brain development, and that's so damaging for their future. So multiple ways in which I found it absolutely fascinating, and I think I said to you before, I'd love to, like, my dissertation at the end of it, I'd like to be able to sort of look at how is what we believe as teachers effective learning. So looking at schools that are doing it to the kind of deepest, highest level, where we're really saying, okay, this is empowering learning, this is impacting learning in a really positive way. How is that actually developing and supporting or not supporting the brain development? And I kind of want to look at that kind of side of it as well.
Wow, so much in there, Jenny, about like motivation, about, like you said, brain development, experiences, building that schema, all that stuff. And I'm the same as you. I find it so interesting. And I think it's a really key message that a lot of us just forget about, because we're so used to dealing with the outward behavior as such, and it can be you see them for that hour as if you're in secondary, and you see them sort of develop over that 5 years. And like you said, you get kids come in year 7 really bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and like you said, within 6 months they've gone to grunt mode, and then you kind of forget that, don't you? And then it becomes that thing of, right, there's so much about society, home life, that development, and so on. So hopefully you've given a lot of people there something to think about as well, and go away and have a look, and maybe, like I said, readjust. But again, some reading as well there for me, so I'm going to add that to my list as well. So that's superb.
I've got the name. It's the Anxious Generation. I think that's the one.
It is, absolutely. And it's so important, not for educators to read, but actually for parents to read, because I think we are so peer pressured to just handing things over and being like, oh, well, everyone else has given their child one, I better give my child one as well. And actually that we don't need to. Like, my children, mainly because of what I do for my job, I always kind of thought, God, I'm going to have to follow the rules with them, aren't I? Otherwise someone's going to catch me out. My son only just got social media. He's just turned 13. It's not allowed until he's 13, so he didn't have it. And yes, we had discussions, and sometimes he'd get a bit grumpy about it, but overall we always explained why. And again, I think that's really important when you're looking at brain development. Children need an explanation, and quite often we're busy or we don't know, especially with technology. Parents don't know, educators don't know, so we just go, you just can't, you're just not allowed it. And it's so valuable to be able to sit and explain something to a child and say, look, this is the reason, and I don't feel comfortable with that, but we can come back to this conversation in 6 months' time, or we can come back to this if we still feel this is unjust. I'll give it some time and we can talk about it. And having those conversations and treating them like they're a grown-up. So if you're going to give them a device, you're treating them like a grown-up. And it's the same thing with schools is, there are things that we should be using and there are things that we shouldn't. And as a teacher, we need to make sure that they are on the right track and they're using the right things, because we've chosen them because they've got pedagogical reasoning behind them, not so they can just play a game and be mindless and be babysat in our classrooms. And that's so important as well. And it comes back to that, again, the Teenage Brain book, it talks a lot. It's an educational psychologist, child psychologist that wrote it. It's fantastic. she talks a lot about giving them examples that are so real that they're only a thread away from it. So when we sit in our classrooms, and again, this goes back to when we teach things that are intangible to them, that happened so long ago, or we're talking about Roger and Lily who've got 6 apples and 10 pears, it makes no sense to them, and it shouldn't. And again, when you talk about brain development, teenagers, if we're not engaging them in that curriculum in a way that they can understand it to their scenario, their setting, in their life, it will not go in, because to them it's nonsense. You're just making it up, and why should I listen?
Yeah. So just speaking about tech and schools and like using it to meet kids where they're at. Your book, The Digital Ecosystem. What does a successful digital ecosystem look like? What if you could start a school from scratch and make one tomorrow? What would that ecosystem be?
Well, there are 4 pillars that I sort of talk about within the book and do generally when I talk about digital strategy, but it starts off with governance, that everybody in the ecosystem, educators, leaders, etc., we all agree upon what we're utilising. So we understand what we're doing and we understand why we're using it. So down to devices, it should be what device is the best for the children that are coming to our school. Now, I know that if I've got a lot of students that have got SEND, there is a certain device that I know is above and beyond every other device. And there's no point in me getting anything else, because it's not going to support them as well. It's going to personalise, it's going to support them, it's going to be like their aid, and they can then go off into life and still use something similar to that. And that's kind of where you need to be at with your digital strategy, and to make it part of that kind of ecosystem that's effective, because it has to link to those people, the stakeholders. Because if it doesn't, again, what's the point? They're not going to use it, they're not going to understand it. But then importantly, if you stay on, for instance, the SEN route, every child who requires it or is statemented or needs support would immediately have that device set up with specific elements to allow them to access that. And I wouldn't just stop at the teacher training. It would be, we'd do student training, we'd do a student boot camp, and we'd be like, this is how we use this device. And this is how we use it responsibly, but we'd agree that together as students, because again, it's what do you think? And it's bringing it back to them. So building those foundations, building safeguards, building all those different elements. And then for me, again, really importantly, is looking at your curriculum. So when you're teaching whatever curriculum it is looking at where are we teaching it? Where are we teaching it from the beginning? Where are we then looking at leveraging it and extending that? And then where am I looking at using that same technology to really innovate in the classroom and to really extend learning, and to allow students to be independent and autonomous and have that agency, if you like, over what they're doing every single day? And how quickly can I get students to a point where they can go in with those 5 or 6 tools that are part of the device that they can just do anything with? And then that's where, for me, it's simple, it's streamlined, it's effective, it crosses boundaries for different subjects. You're just moving it to every single subject and just changing the narrative. So you've got those different skills of transferable, like, information and skills. And then that passes down onto parents as well. And so, again, one of the things that I'll be launching in the next couple of weeks is something called Digital Bridge, because you'll know we didn't necessarily grow up with phones in our pockets. We didn't grow up with that as a teenager. We don't know what that's like, but we've got parents who are growing up with children that are ready for that. They do have that. And it's about empowering them as well and making sure that they're part of that whole school system, because they're our parents and they need help as much as we need help. So I think constantly then just looking at it, I don't think you can kind of ever go, we've done, it's finished, because technology changes every day, every minute, every week. And I was again talking to someone today and they were like, oh, looking forward to the iOS update that comes out in September, which is always really helpful for schools. So just get on track, and then all the devices update. And it's things like that. We just have to constantly think, but what is next? So for instance, AI, how is that now going to integrate into my curriculum? How is that going to impact my teachers? How is that going to impact my learners, to be able to empower them to be able to do things better, more creatively, whatever it happens to be? And it's just constantly about building on top of that framework.
Just picking on that, like I go to kids' birthday parties at my school now, which is always tricky to navigate as a senior leader and kind of trying to field random questions about work while I'm trying to relax on a Saturday. And one of the things there was, it was a load of like, I was just sitting with a group of dads and they were just saying like, we don't have a choice. We're going to have to explore things like TikTok, Roblox, all these different platforms. Like, who knows? Like, a kid who's 3, who knows what it's going to, like, I'm into tech and I'm going to probably find it difficult to keep up.
Yeah.
Because like, I went on Roblox and I felt 1,000 years old. So there's that barrier of you feel like this just isn't for me, but you're going to have to explore it.
Absolutely. And I think so my son's on TikTok, he's got it. No idea. Absolutely no idea. And I kind of have got to that point where I'm like, I get home and you probably do as well. And I'm just like, I don't want to do anything. Don't show me a computer. Don't show me a phone. I don't want to do anything that has anything to do with technology. Because actually quite funnily, my husband and my children call me digital begigital, which is just, their fun little name. And I won't do anything with tech. So my husband sets everything up. He is in charge of all the screen time controls. We obviously like talk about it. We do it together. I get home and I'm just like, I just don't care anymore. I just don't want to do it. And that's how parents feel generally when they get back. They're just like, I've had a really busy day and it's not, I don't understand it and I don't want to carry on with it. But you're right. Our children need that. And again, going back to child development and brain development and that connection, teenagers are the ones where we separate because they're going through so much. They do need their time, they need their thought process, etc. But we find it a lot harder to find the things that they want to connect with us on. So it actually makes it even more important to kind of have those questions and say to them things like, well, just show me. Like, I am horrendous at playing computer games, but I will sit there and play them with them. And they just laugh at me. And that is absolutely fine. And I would much rather do that and have that where they know every so often we'll do it and it'll be fun because they can make fun of me. And that's great. But you have to kind of go, I don't need to be good at it. I don't need to get it. But what I do need to do is have a conversation with them about it. And I don't want to do that in a kind of waggle my finger. What are you doing on that device? I want to do it in a way of going, okay, I can see you playing with it. Just tell me what it does. Like, how does that work? And what's that? And why is that guy funny? And like, because also then you're breaking down all those boundaries. And I think as teachers, we do that as well. We should be going and saying like, oh, I heard that really new cool thing. Tell me about it, and building it into our lessons and saying to them, like, teach me how to do it. Teach me what it means. Teach me the dance or whatever it happens to be that's trending at the time, because it helps them to engage. And actually, if they see you being stupid, failing, they're going to engage with you even more as a teacher, because they're going to see that not everything is perfect and that you're willing to just give things a bit of a go. And it's not, it doesn't always have to be perfect and it's not always about exams. And actually, you just kind of want to connect with them on a different level. And that's what we should do, isn't it, as teachers, is kind of find out who they are. So
no, I completely agree with you there, and it's just about, like you said, lots of people say it, particularly on LinkedIn, of the meet them where they are, and just by going that halfway, by showing that bit of that interest, you're going to get a much better reception than you probably thought you might do in the first place, and it's going to sort of help them and bring that in. So for anyone who's listening who's like, yep, I love all that, sounds great, I'm all into it. However, how do I get started, and how can I get going with integrating some of these tools, and what are some of those challenges they might come across?
Challenges, I guess it depends what environment you're in. I think the biggest challenge anyone will face, and I guess this is quite apt in terms of it being kind of beginning of the school year and things like that, is actually the abundance of things. Schools are very good at stacking high all of these different things that they've brought in, and not really thinking about how they actually understand and meet whatever it is, the needs of the classroom. So I think that is something that goes wrong, is that a teacher will sit there and go, oh my God, there's 500 things. I don't know what to do. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring the thing that I used to use from my old school. And I'm going to bring that in because I know how to use that. And there's no clarity. So that'll be okay. And then obviously that just creates even more mess. And so I think that is the biggest kind of pitfall I see in schools, and that comes back to that governance, is actually what we need to do in schools is say, look, this is what we use. Keep it simple. These are the specific platforms. We also have maybe some learning apps underneath that, depending on the age range or the group. They're very specific. They're driven by pedagogy. Remember, it takes 21 days to kind of forget to learn a new habit and all those things. In that time, as a teacher, you're going, this was so much better in my old school because I could do this. This was doing, I don't know how to do this now, but this. So actually, if you spend 21 days going, you know what, this is going to be hard. It's not going to fall, and I'm going to keep wanting to go back. But if you just keep going for that first month, you will actually find that you do get over it, and you can understand a little bit more about why that school is using whatever it is they're using. And then is at the point where you go, if they're in an absolute mess of all kinds of different apps, you could maybe go in and say, do you want to see if we can unpick this? Let's have a look at what we're actually doing. Or to then say, you know what, you've got all these things, but actually I think this one thing would really help if we got rid of all that and did this. So I think it depends on the school environment you're in. And I think it's about understanding that environment first. But the biggest pitfall for me, and the biggest sort of tech thing that happens that I see for teachers that just switches them off, takes them away from actual learning, is the fact that it's in a big mess in schools and there's just a big tech stack that no one knows what they're doing with.
So I think you see that time and time again in schools, don't you, of stuff that was legacy, like you said, that thing of, I used to use this and it was great and bring it in and so on. Yeah. And I think that 21 days is a great thing. I'm going to cling to that from sort of, like I said, a governance point of view of, right, well, let's do this for 21 days. But then sort of as the lead on it, actually, after that 21 days, then I can start looking at what some of the problems still, if we've still got that actually. So maybe that's one for both sides of the barrier there.
Definitely.
So you are an Apple distinguished teacher, and that obviously means going in and supporting people to implement Apple products in schools. So what's one of the biggest benefits? You mentioned iPads earlier. What is the biggest benefit of an iPad over in education, or bringing in the Apple ecosystem?
For me, interoperability. It flows across everything. I can airdrop documents out to students really quickly. I can walk around my classroom and be mirroring the screen. I can share everything they're doing. And obviously you can do that on lots of different tablets, but my favorite thing is when someone's got an Android phone and they're like, how do I share these photos? And I'm like, well, you just airdrop. And they're like, no, I've got an Android. And I'm like, oh, well, you have to Dropbox that's going to take a while. And you kind of, everything just syncs. And if you've got a good system behind it like Microsoft or Google, then actually everything just becomes really, really easy and really fluid. I also find that for me, one, they're really creative. I was the child that my dad took me outside John Lewis and we would look at the displays of Macs, and he was obsessed with them. I grew up with Apple, always had them. We were always an Apple home because they were more creative. They were more design based. They were just simpler to use. They were easy. And they had all these systems. And one of the things I think for schools is, one, they are actually proven to last longer, by up to 2 years longer, which is a long time in terms of tech. They also come with all the free systems. So you have all these systems that interlink and entwine with each other. You can create these workflows that actually can really help students, one, be creative, but be organized, but also help staff do exactly the same thing. And you don't actually have to pay for them. You switch the Wi-Fi off, you can still use an iPad. There's not many devices that you can say can do that these days. And I think that's really beneficial. You can go outside and be with them and do all sorts of things. But yeah, I think that married with the right system. So my company is an Apple, is a Microsoft partner as well. And we do work with schools to be able to blend the two, because again, you get schools that work really well with the Apple ecosystem, and then they get to maybe secondary, and all of a sudden that drops off a cliff and they're just using Microsoft, and everyone forgets about all the systems they've learned. And so a lot of the time what I do is bridge that gap and try not to lose the skills that we've built in primary and actually keep them going in secondary school. I just find, I wrote my book on my iPad Pro, and I literally interviewed everybody. I typed every page up on it. I edited it. I got it to read it back to me. I annotated it. I did everything on my iPad because it was so flexible.
That's one of the things for us at my school. We ended up getting Samsung tablets because the price tag was a little bit cheaper, and this was a decision I wasn't involved in. but I found that Apple has like a good system around it for like
Yeah.
device control. Whereas because Android is so different, you can't. I've struggled to find something which does the same as Apple that can actually be as flexible with different Android systems. If you know one, anyone, either you, Philippa, or anyone who's listening to this, please send me a message. But I saw that it's, I suppose it's that you're paying the little bit more for more flexibility and that system.
Absolutely. And I think, because of that, you've got much more longevity. So you could actually, so I think there was, they've done a report, a Forrester's report on the iPad devices, and they're bringing out some more actually. And it's always very data driven and very impact driven. But you can have one iPad for the whole of primary that will last you for a child. So if you bought them at the beginning of primary, you'd be able to have that still until year 6. And then through secondary, they suggest that you potentially only need 2. So across that whole education system, you might need 3 devices. Now, if you break that down, it isn't as costly, and actually it's far greater in terms of value than any other Android or anything else. And they've obviously done all the comparatives for that. They are lasting, especially when they're in a system. So if you're in a school and the system is all set up and it's all managed and it's all being used, and that's not to say they're not taking them home, they're using them all sorts of different in arenas. But if they're looked after like that, then they can last up to 5 years. And that's phenomenal. Like, that's a game changer for schools, because you've got 5 years worth of life. So before you get to that point, because a lot of them will be 3 years or maybe even 2, you're already going, okay, teachers have just got used to it, but now X, Y, and Z's come out. We're going to have to change. We're going to change systems. We're going to move on. So everyone's learning something new again. Whereas actually every year, iOS updates. And actually there's still devices. I mean, we've still got devices in our house that still update to the newest versions. And then they recycle them, and there's all these different things. So that for me is why that's the device that I would always pick. Everything in our house is all Apple driven. And also then parental settings for me is a big game changer as well, because it's all inbuilt. But it's not to say that schools don't do well with the other systems. But if you look for a comparable device, you'd be paying more with an Android or a PC version.
So what would you say for people who are in schools where, particularly say secondary, like I said, they're using Chromebooks and they're like, well, there's no keyboard and it's all still touch typing, it's all touch screen. And so where's their typing skills going to come from? Actually, even the Microsoft app is going to be different to it is on a desktop or a laptop or something like that, and so on. Kind of, where would you say sort of that gap falls in there? Does that need to be developed?
I would just be buying iPads with cases that have keyboards. That's it. I just wouldn't even have that conversation. I'd just be like, with the part of what we get, we give them a pencil, they've got an iPad and they have a keyboard, and it's all together in one little thing. And then they've got that flexibility. Because one of the things, my son goes to a school actually that's got Chromebooks, and I watched him about 3 years ago pick it up and try and reverse it and hold it like this to take a photograph of something. And I was like, what are you doing? And he was like, I've got to take a picture of this science experiment that didn't have a reverse camera. And I was like, well, you can't. Like, that's just going to be the worst photograph ever. So we ended up using a different device, taking the photograph, emailing it across, and it was there. But if you imagine you're in a science lesson and you're recording a science experiment, you put that into a folder to be able to analyse whatever that science experiment was. And then you go into English, and actually you're handwriting on your device as an essay or assignment, or you're annotating or whatever. And then you close that off, and then maybe you go to a different lesson. It's a languages lesson, and you're then utilising it in a totally different way. Maybe you are using the keyboard. So you have all that inbuilt, and there is no restriction. So that for me is, there isn't really an argument about whether it's touch typing or not, because actually there is no, they've perfected the screen to such a level that when you handwrite on them, it feels and has the same senses, which also react with your brain in the same way that physical handwriting does. So that's been debunked. And then you've got a keyboard, which most kids are pretty good with if they've been in that environment for long enough, just like adults got used to it. And then we also have the touch screen. I think sometimes when you have a laptop as well, like I even do it with my laptop I've got here right now, I touch the screen and I'm like, damn it, it doesn't do that. But yeah, I think it's flexibility, but equally it has to come into cost. If people don't have the funds to be able to do that, then the next best thing, there are things, but then you do have to look at what the offset cost of, like you just said, Matthew, the device systems for managing them, and then for actually controlling them in the classroom, and all those, and actually it adds up, and it isn't always as cost effective as it first seems.
It's for me, I'm finding it's the hours it's taking for our IT team to do everything that needs to be done to make them work every year.
Yeah.
That's cost. Like, no one, when
Of
you
course,
budget
it's
these
time.
things out, you don't really see time of IT managers as cost, but it is cost.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
As we keep pushing to bring in more digital tech is out there. So how do we make sure when we're integrated into schools that we make sure we're not leaving people behind? Is that by schools providing the devices for people and absorbing that cost, or what are practical steps that we can do to bridge that like digital divide?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I'm a big strong believer now in when we interview teachers is to find out exactly where they're at. And yes, teachers can obviously say whatever they would like. However, my expectation would be if they get there and they tell me that they've done Google Level 2 and Apple Teacher, that they can actually use that device. And I shouldn't have to then teach them that. So if they're going to lie about that, then that's going to be something that's going to get picked up relatively quickly. However, if they're honest and say, you know what, we haven't done it, it's in schools that I've previously worked in, and also ones that I've done strategies with, it's always been, okay, we give people the summer and then the first month of when they're there to be able to catch themselves up with whatever our ecosystems are. So like I've just said there, for instance, if you've got a Google system in the background, maybe your iOS, or if you're a full Google school, I would expect all my teachers to be at least level 2. And I would be paying for that as a leader, saying this is part of our professional development. We expect everyone to be at that level or higher, because that's what we do. And then it really is about looking into those different system levels in terms of what curriculum are we teaching, what's your role within the school, and then actually looking at almost those workflows, because first off, everybody needs to be able to do the basics and then obviously be able to extend those within their curriculum areas. It's very much about being personalised. And this is, again, why we have to be really careful with how many systems we're using. Because if you have too many, you've got to teach all your staff on how to use those and then consistently expect them to be using them. So if I walk into your classroom and you should be using something, I'm going to want to see it. And so if you end up having too many, you kind of get a bit of a negative, because you're trying to hold people accountable to good practices, to being showcasing things that you're using and using them effectively, but then they can't because there's too many. So you kind of a double negative, really, and you can't really expect people to be doing things like that. So I very much believe that we need to make sure that staff aren't sitting there all doing the same thing, that we're very specific. So if you are new to something, then you are at the basis level of that, but actually then giving people the options. Working with somebody at British School Muscat, fantastic guy, Dan, he's been doing an AI strategy and embedding that, and this year is the first year they've done it in their PD, and he has done that of basic and then 3 levels, and there are different workshops on rotation across that which allow people to build into that mastery level of how to use it. And that is a great example of how we should be doing digital technology and learning, is not everybody in one place, but actually being able to scaffold their learning journey just as much as we would with our children. I think that's just really, really important.
Yeah, that's huge, and that's something we've started doing this year at our school. Actually, is meeting them where they're at. We've got teachers that are just completely like almost oblivious to it. I don't really want to use it. I've got my planner. I don't need to do like your calendar. I don't want to do and put my stuff on OneDrive. I'm quite happy where it is, and this, that, the other. We've got others that are absolutely flying, and they're the ones that want to be leading on stuff. They want to be the power users. They want to do that, and that's something we're trying to fit directly into our PD as different levels. And do you see that being sort of the future of digital strategies for schools and so on? What are the steps, bearing in mind that everyone's going to be in different places on their journey?
I think, first of all, it has to be every single person's kind of problem in some ways, because it links into everything we do. Every single person that's given a device, which is every teacher, every administrator, everybody, is in charge of, one, safeguarding children for that, but also understanding their area and remit. So whether it is teaching at a certain grade level or year level, or whether it's being a leader in the school, or whether it's being a teaching assistant, any of those different things, they all have to be able to understand their role. And having people who can lead on, okay, this is my sector, and as part of that, I have a digital strategy element, and my digital strategy element is to make sure, so go back to the SEND example from the beginning, my role is to make sure that my learning support assistants have supported students to put those plans into place on their devices and understand how to use them. So as part of my role as a leader for that department would be to ensure that my staff are confident with using those themselves, so that they then can support those learners to be able to be using those on their own independently, so that then we have more time to be able to support them with things that need much more physical human interaction, as opposed to low level things that they can get a device to do. So very much every single person within the school has a responsibility. And I think what you were saying in terms of those different levels on systems, we need those people, and it's not going to be everyone, but it doesn't have to be everybody. We need those people to be those beacons to say, yeah, you are in charge of it for secondary, you are in charge of it for primary, etc. Because one person in a school where there's thousands of children is not enough to be able to get around to all those people. So it has to be distributed, and it's the only way to effectively allow people to understand that we can't just palm it off on the IT department any longer. It actually has got to be part and parcel of our job. So I think that's really, really important. And I think also leveraging those people, if we know that certain people are coming into our schools with those skill sets, it's actually about saying to them, you know what, I've seen this, and you can say no, but would you be interested in delivering a session? Because actually your skill set would really benefit us here. And I think those things are really important. They're also really empowering for those staff coming on board. And so it really is about personalizing all those different levels and experiences. And then you're talking about those people who, oh, I don't want to use this calendar, I don't want to do that. Again, it's breaking those things down into small steps. It's like, okay, for the first 4 weeks, I just need you to get on board with this. And then, okay, right, you've done that. If you integrate this now, it's going to make things a lot easier for you. So if you could just try for the next week doing this for me, and actually just almost having people on a little plan of like, you're new to the school, you're new to the system, these are the things that we're going to get you on board with, but we're going to do it over time. We're not going to overwhelm you, because you're also trying to understand 500 kids' names, 250 parents, staff members, everybody. And again, mental load, huge.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right.
It's just massive. It's that tricky thing of, I think we're speaking over top of each other. We've got a delay. We'll edit again.
We'll clip that. Yeah, we'll clip that. No, you go. Sorry. No, what was you saying, Matt?
I was just saying, I suppose it's that tricky, and like we said, we think before you joined, like before we added you, we were talking about our inset periods, and it's really tricky to get that balance right of welcoming new staff into your school without massively overwhelming them, and then just forgetting everything you just said during the inset period because their brains have just shorted out.
100%.
And then if you go like, oh, by the way, I've just told you safeguarding insert, all our school procedures, this is how you get around school, here's all the fire exit, and by the way, here's an iPad buy, and run off. It's just going to be too much.
And it's so funny that we spoke over each other about the same thing, because I was going to chip in with exactly that, because you guys are you're like, so I'm in a state school in the UK, and so we have, and the school I'm in, we've got the average service of 10 years. So we've actually got a very, very low turnover. But where you guys are abroad, you usually have quite a high turnover in staff in the contract cycles and so on and everything else. So actually, we've got the opposite problem of not necessarily new and not knowing. We've got staff who are very set in their ways, in a sense. This is the way it's always been. This is what I'm comfortable with. This is how we've always done it. And you've got that barrier to kind of get over. So again, there's going to be different sort of reasons for it, and as why, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And that goes back to getting their niche. What is their why? Why do they teach? How can you get them to see that tech can help that? And almost actually treating them a little bit like they are new teachers. It's almost like drip feeding little things in, like, oh, we're going to want you to do this, we're going to want you to do that, because they have to come up to the other level. You can't have teachers in your school not teaching to the same effectiveness with technology as others. And a really great example of that, and it is over here in the Middle East, but we have a lot of twins. So I've worked in schools before where we've had one twin A in class 1 and twin B in class 2. And the teacher in class 2 is phenomenal, is sending out all sorts of things and creating things and brilliant, like work in the iPad is fantastic. And teacher 1 is not at all. They're just really low. They hate the iPad. They don't understand why it's there. They don't want it. They didn't ask for them. It's a big problem. Why have they had to sign for them? Rah, rah, rah. You know, everything that possibly could be a reason is a reason as to not using them. But that parent sees two very different systems of education in a school where over here they're paying. And that shouldn't happen. And of course, we all have our different styles of teaching, and we all are different people, and we have our own personalities when it comes to being a teacher. But ultimately, the level of education should always be the same. We should always be striving for the best and utilising everything. And when you've got the ability to compare so obviously, there can't be a comparison involved. And you get that in secondary schools, obviously in the UK, where you know you might have had siblings going through teachers, etc., or maybe having different teachers in the same department. But you can't have that kind of discrepancy because it's not fair.
And that just really highlights it, doesn't it? Actually, I hadn't thought about that. God, I hope I don't have twins now. You've put the fear in me.
Just don't ever let them in your class.
Yeah, no, out, off we go. Right,
No,
and I think that very neatly brings us up to an hour. And so we're going to finish off with our quick fires. Do you want to do them this week, Matt?
Yeah, go on, I'll go. So, very quick fire questions. First one's Apple or Android, but I think you've answered it already.
So I just say Android to see what you said. No? Apple, always.
Microsoft or Google?
Oh, it would have been Google. It's now Microsoft. I think they've upped the level.
Ooh.
I know.
Probably feeds into the next one. Teams or Google Classroom?
Teams.
Okay. iPad or Chromebook?
iPad.
Phones in schools, yes or no?
Now this depends on demographics. Am I in the UK in a low income area and I don't provide devices for my children in school?
Yes.
Am I allowed to ask context like that?
That's a quick fire for me. Yes, you are.
Yeah, you can do. I tell you what, we're gonna come up with a new quick. We're gonna come up with a new quick fire round. We'll give you the context, so you say yes or no.
Less quick. Yeah, only because I think if you are giving children devices, there's absolutely no reason for them to have a device in their pocket that they get out and do anything with. Absolutely. However, if you are in an area where you're not providing it, you can't afford to provide it, actually that is their access to phenomenal resources and support and guidance. And actually for our students who have additional needs, that is their companion for life, and they need to understand how to use that for so many accessibility reasons. So taking it off them is just an absolute disservice. And I actually also believe that now as educators, sorry to not quick fire this in the slightest, but we do now have to teach children how to use them as learning tools and not just as tools to scroll. And if we are not allowing that to happen and turning that narrative around to a positive by constantly saying it's not a problem, it's not a problem, it's not a problem, then we're not doing our jobs properly anymore.
Absolutely agree. I'm 100% with you on that.
Yeah, we've got a few more, but that was a very poignant note. I feel a bit bad continuing.
I'm gonna say it now. I literally had it in my head. We're gonna get you back on, and we're gonna have an episode on phones, and we're gonna find.
There we go.
We're gonna find like it's just gonna be all about that because I think it's such a big thing to talk about.
Interesting.
Yeah,
100%.
We're gonna get you back on. We're gonna do a phone episode.
Cool.
So last three: interactive panel or traditional old school whiteboard?
Oh, neither. TV.
TV.
Yeah.
What wheeling the Betamax on a Friday afternoon?
Yeah, it's not what we're doing. No, because you can just mirror. Why would I need anything else? My interactivity is at my device.
Well, there
Why
we
should I
go.
just stand at the front and do that? I should be anywhere.
Ebook or printed book?
That makes sense for Mrs. iPad.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I'm going to throw a curveball in here. Real book.
Real book. Mm-hmm. And last one: coding or creativity?
Creativity.
As a computer science teacher, I'm offended.
And as a
I
fellow
argue that
DT
coding
teacher,
is creative.
I love it.
Coding is creative, but it's not the only creative.
No, I agree.
Thank you. Sorry for
And I
not being
think
so quick.
very nicely it brings us up to the end of the episode, and I literally, there's so much value in there, so thank you so much for coming on and for everything you sort of shared with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, so thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you very
I
much.
really
It's been great
enjoyed
to have
it.
you on.
Thank you so much.
Superb. Right, and we'll get you back on for that for an episode. We've also got tickets still available for AI Education, haven't we? We've got lots coming up, more guests coming on following episodes. We're very, very quickly trundling through that list we put together, so more exciting announcements to sort of come.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you come into the event as well, Philippa.
Mm-hmm.
Can't wait.
Yeah, if you want to hear more about AI and how it's been used in education, get your tickets, make sure you get along. And otherwise, we'll see you in the next one.